I've been taking the subway a lot lately. My car was totaled. Somehow the transmission system was completely busted, and apparently they didn't have any replacements available here and had to ship one from Europe. This means I've had no other option but to take the subway to get to work for the past 3 weeks. At first, I didn't mind it that much, honestly. It was a nice change in my routine. However, now I wish I'd never started in the first place. It's gonna sound so stupid, but I think I should tell the entire story. Yeah, that's be easier to understand. I work in a fast-growing startup, and I have a very flexible schedule due being in the IT department, and most of my job just consisting of system maintenance. This means I often go to work on the afternoons and get off late at night. What can I say? I'm just more productive later in the day, more of a night owl. Plus, our offices are open 24/7 for anyone to just bust in at any time and take care of something, which lets me adjust to whatever schedule is better for me. Anyways, I was taking the subway almost every day to and from the office, and there was always this woman who'd always ride it with me on the way back. I'd always see her standing at the far corner of the station, waiting. I know it was always her because she'd always have her long, frizzy black hair flowing freely. This distinct smell, which I assumed it was alcohol back then, but now I'd say it was closer to bleach. And this dirty trench coat on, that I guess used to be white, but now it was closer to gray. Plus, my office isn't in a very busy side of the city. At the time I usually get out, it was just me and her at the station. I saw her the first time I ever took the subway back home, and ever since then, she never missed a single day. Whenever I'd go underground to get home, I'd find her, waiting. It sounds like it was nothing out of the ordinary. She might have just been a homeless woman who's just living there. She didn't have anything that indicated she might live there, though. No sleeping bag thrown on the floor or blankets or anything, and she was always standing, as if hoping to catch the train as soon as it came. She had something about her, something that seemed oddly familiar. I can't quite say what. The worst of all, though, is that she'd always stand very far away, but wouldn't take her eyes off of me. I'd try to ignore her, but I could feel her stare piercing me, somehow making me feel very exposed, like she could somehow look inside me. It made me really uncomfortable. Anyways, the days went by, and I started dreading that ride back home. I don't really know why. It's not like she meant me any harm. She just gave me these really, really bad vibes. Plus, maybe this is just how I remember it, but I swear every day I'd come down she'd be standing just a bit closer to me than before. It was not just that, though. I hate to be the person telling ghost stories on the internet, but well, normally I just try to avoid looking at her until the subway came, get in, and not look back. I figured she just stayed on the station. One day, though, I gave her a glance as I got in, and saw her going in too. However, once inside, I couldn't see her anywhere. Sure, the subway was pretty full. Maybe I just lost her among the crowd. I'm pretty sure I looked around everywhere, though, and she just vanished. It was creepy. Since then, I decided I'd just take a much longer walk and grab my line at a different station. Problem solved, right? Well, 2 days later, guess who I find when walking down the stairs to this new station? The woman stood there again, this time just a few feet away, X's fixed on me. I had enough. Despite every instinct in my body telling me to stay as far away as possible, I decided to approach and confront her. The smell was overwhelming. It made my eyes sting. I don't know how she knew I'd be here or why she was following me, but I wasn't gonna let this crazy woman harass me anymore. I asked her what she wanted, trying to sound intimidating. She just stood there, unresponsive, her bright blue eyes fixed on my face, wide open and mesmerizing. I raised my voice, but was unable to hide the shakiness that was slowly overtaking my entire body. I hadn't noticed how old she actually was. Her cheeks were sunken, and her face was completely covered in deep wrinkles. However, Under the penetrating blue eyes and the wrinkle-covered skin, I could see absolutely nothing. Her stare was completely expressionless. Every person I've ever met has something that shows how they think, feel something. Be it a small curve of the mouth, the speed at which they blink, the flare of their nostrils at the rhythm in which they breathe. Anything. It's not something you really notice until you see someone who doesn't have it. This woman was a blank canvas, and a chill ran down my spine staring at her empty soul. I turned away and ran out of the station, unwilling to face her for another second. I took a cab home from then on. It didn't really matter if it was costing me thrice as much. I just didn't want to see her ever again. And I didn't for a while. Almost a week had gone by, and I'd mostly left the incident behind me. Maybe I just exaggerated, seen what I wanted to see, or something. Maybe it was the tiredness and drowsiness after work making me see things, and she was just this crazy homeless woman who didn't have any sense of boundaries. I was thinking all of this while I approached a subway station after having a couple of drinks with some friends. I'd blown a lot of money buying some rounds for everyone, and I didn't want to waste any more getting in an Uber or a cab to get home. Therefore, I started hesitantly going down the stairs, trying to convince myself there was nothing to worry about. I got all the way down and took a peek in the platform. It was empty. I sat down on one of the benches, relieved. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a chill go through my entire body. The smell was back. I turned around brusquely, and there she was again, standing closer than she'd ever been before, piercing me with her empty gaze. I got up and bolted without looking back. She didn't follow. I ran for a while, it must have been at least a mile, when I decided I had no other option but to call an Uber. So I did, and sat on the sidewalk to catch my breath and wait. The peace didn't last long. A few seconds later, she was there, standing on the opposite side of the street, looking at me again. It was the first time I seen her out of the underground, and my heart almost burst out of my chest. I yelled at her to get away. I threatened to call the cops, but she didn't react at all. My Uber arrived, and I got in as fast as possible, telling him there was someone chasing me, and to drive me to the nearest police station. I went to file in a report for stalking. They told me they'd try to keep an eye on her, but to try to remember if I'd seen her before, because stalker cases often have been going for much longer than what the victim might realize. I tried thinking about it, but honestly the subway was, according to me, the first time I'd ever seen the woman in my life. I decided to check some old photos on my camera roll, just to make sure, I guess. I'd taken a selfie with some friends around a month ago, in front of a bar near the area. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until I zoomed in. There she was, standing far away on the background. This huge sense of dread overcame me. I began checking every single one of my photos for the woman. I didn't find her in any other. That is, until I checked a photo over a year old. I was standing next to a monument in my city, and in the background, the woman staring at me. Terrified, I went into one of my old family albums. I was beginning to get this very bad feeling. I opened it and began checking old photos. 5, 10, 20 years ago. Finally, there she was again, a photo of when I was a little kid. Somehow, she looked exactly the same. I don't really know what this means. I haven't seen her since then. And now that I finally got my car back, I drive everywhere. I refuse to stay out at night for too long. I'm afraid I'll see her somewhere. At the gas station, or when walking by the street. I don't know what she wants. It seems like she's always been there. And now, for some reason, she's finally reaching out. Whenever I think of the supernatural, my mind goes to old millenary cities with layers upon layers of history, dreams, hopes, and secrets buried under them, stirring restlessly. Being a Brit myself, that's where I've had most of my experiences, at least. Not this time, though. I never expected a city as new as Ciudad de Mexico to be the next place of an encounter, much less its relatively new metro system. Yet here we are, and it must have been the most disturbing event I've gone through in my entire life. In any way, I guess it's best I just get into what happened, shall I? I was visiting Ciudad de Mexico, or Mexico City, whichever you prefer, just to vacation a bit. I know this city doesn't offer beaches or tropical paradise, but that's not really the sort of thing I look for when I'm traveling. I'm more of a culture person, and I find there's no better place to get to know a country and its people properly than its capital city. It's almost always the perfect melting pot of the diverse subcultures of the country, forced to coexist together in a single place. Therefore, there I was, taking tours, visiting museums, getting to know the different parts of what's is one of biggest, busiest cities I've ever come across. The people there, while very welcoming, always have something else on their minds. Everyone seems to have always something more important to do. It was interesting though, and a very different vibe from my small town back home. But regardless, I'm not here to talk about Ciudad de Mexico. My encounter happened a few days into my trip. I'd been going around on my feet or by bike the entire day, and frankly my legs were getting pretty tired. It was already getting pretty late, and I'd been having a drink in what I'd been told is not one of the safest spots in the city, so I figured it might just be time to go back to my hotel. I thought about getting a taxi, but then I realized up until then I hadn't used the metro system at all yet, and a station was just a few steps away, and according to Google Maps, it'd take me right next to my destination. I began making my way downstairs, and just when I entered the tunnels, I heard some footsteps behind me, and turned around slightly as if just to get a glimpse of the person behind me. A man was also coming downstairs, dressed in this long jacket, jeans, and with his hand in his pockets. He was obviously trying to seem inconspicuous, and I remembered one of the locals I'd met that day had warned me about the metro being dangerous, especially at night. Cursing myself for not paying better attention, I began walking faster, just to see if he'd follow me. Once we reached an intersection, and I took the path to the right, he followed very closely, and I knew he was after me. I began running through the tunnels, and he didn't hesitate to start chasing me. I took turns left and right, not caring where I'd end up in, just trying to lose him in the underground. As I ran, I came across an emergency exit door just a bit ajar. Without hesitating, I got inside and closed the door after me. It was completely dark inside, but I climbed the stairs instinctively. Soon, his footsteps completely faded away. Once I reached the top, I began feeling the walls for a light switch, but I ended up grabbing a door handle instead, hoping to come out somewhere above ground. I opened it. I crossed to the other side and stopped, heaving, and tried to recover my breath. What awaited me at the other side, surprisingly, was more tunnels. I'd somehow climbed all of those stairs and I was still underground. I turned around and at first considered making my way back down again. After a second thought, I decided it was a better idea to just try to find an exit on this floor if I wanted to avoid running into the man again. I began walking through the metro tunnels until I came across two different colored metro signs pointing to two opposite metro lines, very similar to the ones I'd encountered when I'd just gotten in. The thing is, though, there was something very strange. The signs were written in an entirely different language. I don't speak Spanish, but the signs didn't even have the Latin alphabet. They were these strange, pointy symbols. I pulled out my phone to try to see if Google Maps could be of any help, but I wasn't getting any signal. Not very surprising, but I'd swear I could still get a signal when I'd gone downstairs. Resigned, I decided to try my luck with the yellow one on the right. I walked through the tunnel, and I kept on walking. God, it must have been at least an hour, and the tunnel somehow kept on going. I knew something was seriously wrong by then. I just didn't know what else I could do. I finally arrived to the platform. I didn't look like anything special though, just a normal metro station, like any other in the world. Somewhat relieved, I figured I might have just ended up on an actual normal platform, and my best bet would be to take the metro to the next station and try to orient myself a bit from there. I sat down and waited. The electric timetable was off, so there was no saying how long the next train would take. Suddenly, the train arrived. I approached as it came to a stop, but when I looked at the passengers inside, I froze right where I was. They looked like normal Mexican people, but somehow, they were all facing the exact opposite way to me. That means I couldn't see anyone's face, just the back of their heads. The train came to a full stop, and the doors slid open. No one came out of it. The door stayed open, as if waiting for me to get in. I approached slowly. No one inside made the slightest move, the slightest reaction. I could hear conversation and movement coming from inside the train, but then by looking through the windows, the sounds didn't match at all. Everyone was standing still, like dolls. I got a really bad feeling, so I turned around and walked away in a rush. Wherever that train was going, I didn't feel like finding out. I'd had enough of the place and began walking back, ready for crossing the really long tunnel once again. It didn't take more than 2 minutes till I was in front of the two signs again, though. I headed straight for the door through which I'd come from, and found it gone, just a solid concrete wall instead. Desperation began to bubble inside me. Unsure of what to do, I went back to the bifurcating path, and as I was about to go for the red sign's tunnel, a chilling, blood-curdling scream came straight through. Terrified, I ran the opposite way and dived into a side corridor. This one led me to more bifurcations, and I took one without thinking. It led me to another crossroad, and I went into the opposite this time. This pattern repeated itself again and again and again, until I'd lost all sense of time and space. I was exhausted. I just needed to find an exit, but all I saw were tunnels and tunnels that kept twisting and turning forever. Finally, unable to take a single step more, I sat on the ground, shaken, desperate, and hopeless. I don't know exactly when, but at some point, I fell asleep. I woke up suddenly with a gasp. In what felt like a second later, I looked in front of me and saw another tunnel, extending to God knows where. Suddenly, something marvelous happened. A person walked right past me. I got up immediately and ran through the other side of the tunnel. I came out to the same stairs I'd gone down through the day before. Daylight was seeping inside the station, and it was bustling with real, live people going about, taking the public transport as I assumed they do every day. Overjoyed, I climbed the stairs in a flash and never looked back. I felt terrible the next day, so I went to get a quick checkup and found out someone had apparently spiked my drink. And yeah, I mean that would explain everything away. I'd been drugged up and spent the entire night mumbling about on the metro station, hallucinating. That didn't sit right with me, though. I was really shaken up for it to just have been in my mind. I went back to the station afterwards, while daylight was still out, and tried to retrace my steps from the previous days. After a bit of walking, sure enough, I came across the same emergency exit door, slightly ajar, inviting. I'm not making that same mistake twice. There's something living on my metro station. I'm sorry, that's a very dramatic beginning, but it's true. I don't know what it might be, how long it's been there for, or why. It's nothing I've ever seen before. I don't really think it has a body. At least not the way we usually understand it. See, I moved to Paris for my studies a couple of months ago. I managed to find a small apartment on a part of the city that's pretty far away from the center. Since my institute is near the center, and basically all my student life happens around the area, I had no other option but to take the metro almost every day. This also means, since I like to get the chance to, enjoy the Paris nightlife once in a while with friends, that it was incredibly common for me to be riding the metro back home at pretty late at night. It was on one of those times when I first saw it. It must have been around 4 a.m. I was on my way home, a little bit more buzzed than I'm used to, my mind wandering as I tried to stay awake until I reached my stop by watching the stations go by out my window. As the metro pulled to my stop, I saw it, this strange black mass hovering over the station. It was just for a short moment, then it immediately vanished. I blinked, figuring it might have been a weird shadow cast by the train or a trick of the light or something. Regardless, seeing there was nothing there, I got off the metro without giving it any more thought. As I climbed the stairs, though, I think I felt the lights getting darker behind me. I'm not sure. I didn't really pay any attention to it. For some reason, by the time I was lying in bed trying to fight the dizziness and fall asleep, the events kept playing over and over in my mind. It could have been anything. Hell, I was pretty drunk. For all I know, it was actually the metro's shadow when it drove in front of one of the lights. It didn't look like a shadow, though, and that really bothered me. I ended up sleeping with the lights on. The next day, I'd forgotten about it. In fact, I'd actually forgotten about most of the night, and my main concern was my massive hangover. I never even thought about it again until a week later. It was around 11 p.m. I'd agreed to meet some friends at a bar around the city center, so I was sitting down on my metro station, waiting. Not many people were taking the metro at that time. There was only a young guy sitting at the far end, and a middle-aged woman, I think. As I waited, I glanced briefly into the dark tunnels through which the metro drives through. I don't really know why, just letting my eyes wander around. Something caught my eye, though. I saw these gray little critters scurrying at one side of the tracks. Rats. Everyone knows Paris is full of them, and it wasn't the first time I saw them, especially not on the metro. I'd never seen so many together, though. Curious, I got closer to get a better look. The rats were moving in this large group, running fast along the train tracks of the opposite side. They were being super noisy, too, squeaking as they hurriedly moved along the narrow path. They seemed to be fleeing something. I tried to get a better look at the side they were running from, but I saw nothing but darkness. Then it struck me, though. This little corner of the tunnel, closer to the fleeing rats, was abnormally dark. Like it wasn't normal darkness from the tunnels. Something black, opaque, and shapeless stood in that spot. I suppressed a gasp as the memory came back to me all of a sudden. I was sure it was the thing I'd seen that other night. As I stared at it, slowly gliding through the tunnel, the metro drove into the station, and I lost sight of it. I got in and tried to peek from the window, but the thing was nowhere to be seen anymore. I wasn't able to take it off my mind the entire evening. I sort of tried to explain it to my friends, but it didn't really seem like they believed me. I didn't push further and tried to leave it behind and have a good time. I ended up spending the night at one of their places, claiming mine was too far and I didn't feel like going back. Truth is, I was scared. The way the rats were fleeing. I've never seen an animal act with sheer terror up until that day, and it really hadn't sat right with me at all. I was half expecting to see it when rode the metro home again the next day. I stepped out of the train and looked everywhere, making sure the coast was clear and ready to run at a moment's notice, but I soon noticed it was gone. That didn't make me any less paranoid, though. From that day on, I tried to avoid that station, especially at night. The biggest problem is, though, that it was the only one close to my apartment. I had no other efficient way for getting around, and that forced me to either be late to everything or have to leave home at least an hour earlier than I usually did in order to walk almost 2 kilometers to the nearest station. It worked for a few days, but eventually I had enough of it. I figured that the thing hadn't actually been dangerous up until then. At least not to me. Maybe I could just take the metro, ignore it if I ever saw it, and get on with my life. I had no real reason to avoid the station. It was hard explaining that to my legs, which started to get really wobbly as I made my way downstairs once again. But I was determined. The station was absolutely empty that night, despite it being just 9 p.m. My footsteps resonated through the entire empty underground as I carefully stepped down towards the tracks. I checked the timetable. The train would be coming in 3 minutes. I just had to wait 3 minutes down there, and nothing more. Sitting down nervously on a bench, I began to scroll on my phone, trying to distract myself. I couldn't ignore it for long. After a while, its presence was making my throat close up. I looked up from my phone and saw the hovering black mass clearly for the first time. I floated right above the train tracks, somewhat hidden by the darkness. I could see it though, and giving it a proper look was disconcerting. Have you heard about that black paint that absorbs almost all visible light and leaves a matte, opaque surface on things? Well, it was just like that. A splotch of absolute black just floating in the middle of the air. It had no eyes, nothing that may give a clue it's a sentient creature, yet I knew it had its gaze dead set on me, and for some reason that filled me with a deep, deep despair. Involuntary tears started running down my cheeks, and I began to feel as if I could not think anymore. Like my mind was numb. The thing began to expand, slowly growing larger and larger, and the room began to feel dimmer and dimmer. I tried to run, but I couldn't think. I could do nothing but see the mass expand as my body was frozen with fear. A noise started coming out of it. It was this deep, crackling noise that began to get louder and louder until I felt I couldn't even hear my own breaths. The noise wasn't coming out of it anymore. It was in my head, and I began to feel as if I wasn't a person anymore. My will was gone, my thoughts were gone, and it was just fear and noise. My body stood up by itself and began walking towards the black mass, slowly but surely, step by step, and I could do nothing but watch. I was just a few steps away from the tracks, just about to reach it when suddenly, the metro arrived. It blew my hair violently with its speed, and I swear I felt it almost grazed my nose. I'd come back into me, and I noticed how close I'd been to the tracks. Shaken, I stepped inside the metro and rode away. Ever since then, I'd never set a foot down that station again. I now know it's not something I can confront. My concerns were affirmed a few days ago as well. Someone committed suicide on that same station. Apparently, they'd been standing right in the middle of the tracks when the metro drove in.